Shabbat Shalom. 10 minutes is inadequate. My lack of being able to speak Hebrew is, we will miss so much just by using the English language, but we'll do what we can. And so we're going to hit the high points, so buckle up and here we go. What is the greatest vision of Messiah in the Torah? To begin with, we'll concentrate on three words here: vision, Messiah, and Torah. We will use, next slide, let's use terms interchangeably here: visions, types, shadows, foreshadows, prophecies. I'm including all of them in the same thing. We're going to be again looking at references, but let's go to the next slide, and then one more slide, please. I'm changing it up just a bit. Oh, let's go to another one. Another one, please. One more. Right here, let's stop at the Torah. The Torah, the law, the first 5 books of the Old Covenant. Genesis, that is the book of beginnings of the human race, of the Hebrew nation, and it contains messianic prophecies. Exodus, that is the call of Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Passover, plus messianic prophecies. Next book is Leviticus. That is the affirmations of God's holiness. His directives for the nation of Israel to be holy, plus messianic prophecies. The book of Numbers, that's where they take the census of the nation. 40-year wilderness journey, prophecies of Moses, Aaron, and the nation of Israel, and messianic prophecies. And then the book of Deuteronomy, that's the second law of Moses, or Moses' reinstatement of the law to the nation of Israel, plus messianic prophecies. Okay, so we've touched on visions, types, foreshadows, prophecies. We've laid out what the Torah is that we're going to talk about. Let's go back up a couple of slides to the word Messiah. Let's go back again. Make sure I don't skip anything. One more, please. Let's see. Okay, well, let's before we get to Messiah, let's talk about the visions, types, shadows, foreshadows. And what we have, I've categorized 3 general categories of this. Human characters can be types or foreshadows. Abraham, Moses, he was intimate with God. He was a deliverer. Of course, he was mortal. He was human. But we're going to be, an idea to keep in mind, we're going to be comparing or looking at visions or types of the Messiah, and we have to know what the real Messiah is to be able to compare the two, to what to look out for the real thing. Melchizedek, now that's an interesting guy. And I get to throw in a little Hebrew here. Melech, one of the definitions of Melech is king. Tzedek, one of the definitions is righteousness. Well, Melchizedek was the king of Salem, and one of the definitions of Salem was peace. That makes Melchizedek the King of Peace. Does that remind? Well, it reminds me of the Prince of Peace. Noah. Noah was a deliverer of a sort. Isaac. Interesting. Isaac, there are so many in almost every verse in the Torah points to the Messiah, is a foreshadow. Just take Isaac just for a second. He was willing to go to the altar. He completely trusted his father. There are many other references or parallels between Isaac and the real Messiah. Joseph was a savior, a deliverer of a sort. There are non-human but living types of the Messiah. The first reference of a non-human living messianic type was in the Garden of Eden. As typical for humans, Adam and Eve attempted to fashion fig leaves to cover up their, say, sin. But that was, as usual, of course, inadequate. God provided the skin of an innocent living being to be the covering in place of the fig leaves. That is the first reference I'm aware of that the shedding of blood is required for redemption. And there's others, but let's go to some non-living types of visions. The main one I think of is the brazen serpent. Come to the serpent, look upon it, and they were healed. But those are just some examples for you to look up yourselves in more depth. Let's go to the next slide, please. Messiah, that is the third term that we're going to concentrate on now. The real Messiah versus inadequate type substitutes. We must know what the real Messiah is to be able to, just like to be able to identify inadequate messiahs. Government officials that chase currency forgers, the first thing they do is learn everything there is to know about the real currency. So when they see a forgery, well, they can identify it. Okay, next slide, please. Well, there are many characteristics of the Messiah, our Messiah. King, Most High King, interestingly enough, yet humble and meek. He stands as a priest. He stands in the gap for us. He intercedes for us. He is not the high priest, but the highest priest. Divine. And interestingly enough here, of course, human also when he walked during his earthly ministry. Sinless, intimate with God. Many others types were intimate with God. He was a prophet, the ultimate prophet, great physician. He sacrificed his life, gave his blood for us. He was what I would call a true redeemer. So Moses, all of the other types of messianic figures, to my knowledge, did not shed divine blood for us. Next slide, please. The other messiahs, mortal kings, mortal priests, they were not divine. They were fully human, sinful, while some of them were intimate with God. They were prophets, and that should be mortal sacrifice, not and they offered mortal sacrifice and mortal blood, not divine. And were they redeemers? I don't think so. They all fell short in several aspects. Next slide, please. Okay, so the greatest messianic vision of Messiah, messianic vision in the Torah. Okay, let's look at specifically, next slide, please, in the book of Genesis. Okay, well, we have chapter 3, verse 15. And I shall put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. Okay. There are other visions as well. Eve's expectation about the Messiah, chapter 4. Noah and the flood story, chapter 6. The call of Abram, later his name was changed to Abraham, chapter 12. And as I mentioned previously, the testing of Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And of course, again, Isaac as a type of Messiah, starting in chapter 22. Okay, good visions of the Messiah there. Okay, well, let's go and see what's next in Exodus. Next slide, please. Okay, as I mentioned, Moses is a messianic vision. Intimate with God. He walked with God. He was so close to God, he came down off the mountain, he had to cover his face. The Israelites couldn't bear the glory of God emanating from him. Chapter 4, reference to the firstborn of Egypt is to die. Chapter 12 begins the Passover story. All kinds of visions, types in there. Chapter 23, the promise of supernatural assistance. Well, I don't know about you, but I go for a Messiah that is supernatural. That's what I'm looking for. Okay, well, let's go to the next book, Leviticus. Next slide, please. Okay. That is talks about the Levitical priesthood and all that they're to go through in being able to go in and approach God, to intercede for, to stand in the gap for the people. Okay. Talks about the human priest. Okay, well, Yeshua is our perfect high priest. Lots of parallels, types to point out there. Here's something that's interesting: superior blood versus mortal blood. The typology of the Day of Atonement, the Day of Coverings. That's today. Yom Kippur. Then there's all of the typologies, type references in all of the feast of Israel in chapter 23. Okay, lots of stuff there. Let's go to the next slide, please. Numbers. This is again where the story reference is made to the bronze serpent. That's there are many details, references that we could go over there, but we don't have time. But that's in the verse 21. Verse 24 talks about Balaam's fourth oracle. Okay? Well, let's go to the next slide, Deuteronomy. Here I will point out that the Messiah is the greatest prophet, the ultimate prophet. Chapter 18 talks about a prophet like Moses. Well, chapter 21, prophetic messianic illustration. I would encourage you to go look at that. What I submit is the greatest messianic vision in the Torah is the shedding of the innocent blood of the Passover lamb. There is no redemption of sin, no reconciliation without the shedding of blood, shedding of divine blood, shedding of holy blood. Life is in the blood. Yeshua poured out His life for us through the pouring out of His blood. In fact, I would submit that the Father's life was in His blood. He poured it out so that we may have that life, that blood. The confession and pleading of the blood is the central theme, much like the crimson thread through all of the Old Covenant, of course, the Torah. So, I would, again, submit that the confession, and I mean, when I say confession, I mean the oral speaking of, that is applying the blood. That is how we apply the blood today. We are created in their image. And how did God create everything? By the spoken word out of His mouth. So we are created to do that very same thing. And the confession, the application, when we speak the blood over someone, it is greater than when the priest sprinkled the blood over the accoutrements in the tabernacle, over the Israelites. That is, we speak a greater sacrifice. The life is in the blood. And what I want to do is to commend up to you a reading, a book that goes into great detail about this. H.A. Maxwell Wyatt, W-H-Y-T-E, The Power of the Blood. Also want to mention that was provided help to me in preparing this, a book by called Exploring Bible Prophecy from Genesis to Revelation. Tim LaHaye and Ed Henson. It's hard for me to express and get across how important the blood is. Without the blood, we have not been redeemed. It is the simple. It's for me. Once I was able to get beyond intellectualizing certain things, because as pea-brained as I may be, I overcomplicate things with human constructs. Once I would accept His Word His greatest revelations are the simplest. At the initial Passover, supposedly, they had one lamb for every household, or approximately 10 to 15 people. So the census indicated there were approximately 600,000 males 20 and up, extrapolated out about 2.5 million people, Israelites. Divide that by, say, 12. Over 208,000 animals were sacrificed. Innocent blood was shed. And that does not hold a shadow to one Messiah, the true Messiah's blood that was shed. That's all. Shabbat Shalom.